At first, Brooke didn't know he was being followed. He would take his lunch every day at the same place, Embankment Gardens near the River Thames. He would always find a seat to settle down and watch the world go by. It was a very pleasant place among the trees and the statues, and he felt a strange sort of camaraderie with the other workers who would also sit there taking a break from their sometimes stressful day. He spotted a number of regulars each day, but today he saw two figures that didn't fit in there. One was a hulking figure with a vertical scar who exuded menace, while the other was a smaller man who appeared to keep his colleague on a tight leash, as if he was some sort of animal or pet. The policeman caught them glancing back at him every few minutes. Both of them seemed to be figures he wouldn't want to meet on a dark night. He decided to eat his sandwich, cheddar cheese and pickle in crusty white bread, before deciding on his course of action. He tried to make sure they hadn't seen that he'd clocked them. Of course, his job meant that he was a target for all manner of unhinged people, but usually he managed to avoid violent encounters. He had a bad feeling about this pair watching him, but he wasn't going to let them spoil his break. He picked at the sandwich his wife had carefully made for him. She was always very thoughtful like that. She always mixed Branston with piccalilli because he liked the combination. Taking another bite, he closed his eyes and tried to enjoy his lunch, hoping it might not be his last. He looked over and saw that the mismatched pair was still spying on him furtively every now and then. He was pretty confident that he was their target, but he needed to work out what he should do after he'd polished off his lunch. His wife had also given him a red apple, which he crunched on while considering his position. A few people passed him as he took his lunch, a woman with a young child, probably a professional nanny from her attire, and a couple of young London businessmen in some sort of a hurry. Brooke polished off his lunch and got ready to move. He stood up and gathered his bag. If these were to be his final moments, he wouldn't go without a fight. Police weren't armed, not officially anyway, but he did carry a small Webley Mark I pistol, a .22 caliber handgun. He felt for it in his bag and found it. It might give him a slight edge over his two followers. Brooke walked away from his lunch spot and saw over his shoulder that the two men had moved from their position. He wasn't as young as he once was, but with necessity being the mother of invention, he was able to walk at quite a clip. The hulking monster was deceptively swift, though, despite his seemingly preternatural size, and the pair kept pace with him without breaking much of a sweat. He thought he could smell the malevolence from the larger of the pair, so he closed his eyes to try and block him out. He turned out of Embankment Gardens, heading for escape towards the river. The pair was still behind him, following at a little distance. He sped up considerably as he joined the crowds that walked parallel to the River Thames. His actions had surprised his uninvited companions, and as he continued to walk very quickly past Somerset House, Brooke thought that perhaps by some miracle he had outwitted the pair. He looked around and they were nowhere to be seen. He slowed down only to come face to brutal face with the more thuggish of the pair, who had reappeared out of nowhere as if he was in one of those magical shows that Brooke's wife sometimes liked visiting in Limehouse. The other man reappeared in quick succession, then addressed Brooke very calmly. "I do hope we didn't interrupt your lunch, DCI Brooke," the smaller of the two said. He spoke clearly but with an implicit menace in his voice. "We have a mutual friend, Mr. Walpole, who is in possession of some items our employer is keen to recover, but he's been rather, shall we say, elusive in recent days. And he's taken up with a new partner, a man who we thought would know better. Perhaps his much vaunted reputation is not quite as deserved as we first thought." Brooke composed himself, out of breath after his run. Swift's companion watched him closely as if a wrong word could cause him to snap at any point. "If it's Mr. Holmes you're referring to, then yes, I'm also rather disappointed in his recent actions, Mr. Brooke asked. "My name is Jack Swift, and my associate is Joshua. Our employer is less patient than myself, my dear policeman friend, so if I were to return to him with no further news, his wrath would be great. So any information you might have as to his whereabouts would help to ameliorate the situation," Swift replied. Joshua watched, his sinister gaze burning into Brooke as he stroked his chin. "I'm afraid I'm unaware of Mr. Walpole's current location, and the same is true of Mr. Holmes, Mr. Swift," Brooke replied as stridently as he could manage in the current situation. "Please believe that if I did know anything, I would be happy to share it with yourselves. But also be aware that threats to His Majesty's Constabulary are not taken lightly. So I would appreciate it if you were to let me go about my business at once." Swift looked a little bemused at the policeman's response, as he was obviously a man unused to people answering back to him. He considered his response for a few moments, and then rummaged around in one of the side pockets near his greatcoat. After a short time, he pulled out a small bladed knife. He held the knife in his left hand while addressing Brooks. "This is a tanto, DCI Brooke, a small Japanese knife." Swift replied with cold glee. "It's mostly used by the Yakuza, the gangsters from those islands. The Yakuza use it to cut off their fingers as a sign of atonement. I hear it's quite painful, as the nerves are very sensitive in your digits." He continued to speak after a few moments. "I'm going to use it to send a message to Messrs. Holmes and Walpole. Joshua, if you would be so good as to hold Mr. Brooke down, as this is going to hurt quite a lot." Joshua held the policeman down as Swift took his knife and moved closer to his target. Brooke closed his eyes as if not looking at what was going on would mean that it wasn't actually happening. There was a series of sawing noises, a crunch, and a low searing pain in the policeman's finger. Brooke had served in the British Army, so he wasn't unaccustomed to seeing people in pain. But it had been a few years, and he had forgotten what real pain felt like. He opened his eyes to see a small amount of blood, less than would have filled a teaspoon, but still the cause of a great deal of agony. But the damage was already done. Swift had left the top half of his finger on the ground, but the pair had already left the scene of the handiwork. Brooke used a handkerchief to retrieve it from the ground. He doubted they could reattach it, but just in case they could, he thought he should take it with him. The sound of sawing stayed in his head, and the smell of bloody iron remained in his nostrils.